Welcome. My name is Tina Sicca. I'm a lecturer in media and culture at Newcastle University, and I'm really excited to introduce the series of podcasts featuring interviews with BIPOC or BAME senior scholars and NINE DTP studentship recipients. These conversations aim to get students from minority groups motivated and enthusiastic about applying to the NINE DTP scheme by showcasing the innovative and really interesting work being done by these academics and students. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome, everyone. I would like to welcome to the discussion Nafisa Insan. She is a PGR in public health, and her research focus is on the intersections between ethnic health disparities, maternal mental health, and looking at developing countries in particular. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So you are a recipient of the NINE DTP scholarship, and what year are you in now?
So I've just started my second year now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So under these conditions, I know it's a little different than hopefully people in the future will be, doing some of their work. But I wanted to ask first, maybe if you would tell me a little bit about your background and your journey to the PhD.
Yeah, sure. So I started off, my undergrad was in biomedical science. So slightly different to what I'm doing now. It was very kind of like natural sciences based, very much focused on like the cellular human body and how it works. During my first year, I realized that wasn't for me. But I stuck with it because I was interested in health, and the things we were learning was very interesting. But it was in final year that we got to specialize into a particular topic, and I chose global health because it was something completely different, and it was looking at health from a more wider perspective. And I loved that year. That was my favorite year. And the research project that I did, it was a systematic review, and even though it was a lot of reading, I really loved it. I just loved learning new things. So it was from kind of like my third year of undergrad that I realized that research in public health was what I was really interested in. So then I pursued my master's in public health as well. And that year really kind of solidified my interest in research. And I was like, yes, this is definitely where I belong and where I see myself in my career. And I loved my research project, and my PhD supervisor is actually my master's supervisor as well. So we continued and she helped me through the whole application process. And it was really lovely. It was I think it was a very kind of natural progression into a PhD. I didn't ever think, like it wasn't in my mindset that I wanted to do a PhD. It was something that my supervisor brought up because I didn't know about the scholarship before my supervisor told me about it. And it seemed really interesting in terms of the social sciences aspect of it, really interested me. So yeah, it was a very natural progression into academia, and yeah, I love it so far.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about your research, but you brought up something that's come up in a lot of other conversations around having a mentor, like someone to tell you that, or work with you on, that this is something that you should pursue. And it seems like every student that I've spoken to has had a person who would do this. Can you talk about maybe that a little bit, the mentorship?
Yeah, of course. I mean, literally my supervisor, she guided me through why maybe I should apply. She never forced it onto me. She gave me the option, and she talked me through some of the benefits and just what the whole process of doing a PhD will be like. And apart from just supervising me on my project, she's really great. She tells me about all my extracurricular things that I can be doing during my PhD to really develop my kind of skills. And it's really great to just have someone who knows what they're talking about, and someone who doesn't judge you for not knowing. And I can just email her whenever, and yeah, she really guides me through like all aspects of academia.
Yeah, and that's something that can be really hard, like if you're in a situation with so many students, is to make that connection with a potential supervisor or a potential someone to really guide you through the process. So yeah, so your area is health. Can you talk about your research a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I'm looking at maternal mental health, particularly in lower and middle income countries. So because I'm South Asian myself, I'm Bangladeshi, so I'm focusing my research in South Asia. So I'm looking at Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and then with a particular focus later on just in Bangladesh. And I'm looking at antenatal depression, so depression during pregnancy, which hasn't been given as much attention as depression postpartum. So I thought this was quite a nice research gap that there hasn't been much research. And what I'm trying to focus on, because it is social sciences scholarship, so I want to look at the social determinants related to antenatal depression, things such as intimate partner violence, and there's a lot of gender studies involved as well, just looking at gender inequalities within such communities and how that relates to depression during pregnancy. And also I want to do a bit of qualitative work as well, looking at the perspectives from both pregnant women and healthcare providers in Bangladesh to see how they view depression and mental health generally, how healthcare seeking behaviour is like. Do pregnant women seek healthcare for their mental being as well as just physical needs as well? So yeah, that's kind of what my project is looking at. There's been quite a few changes to the project because of COVID, because I was meant to be travelling to Bangladesh this year to do my fieldwork, but that didn't happen. So I'm not sure if or when I'll be able to travel out. So I've changed a few things here and there. But it's really interesting to just see where the research takes me. And yeah, I think it's interesting because it's a field that hasn't been looked at as much. I'm just interested in seeing what actually comes up and what the results show. So yeah, that's a bit about my research.
Yeah, so I suppose it really married together the social determinants of health, like from poverty and education and intimate partner violence and everything that's structural, and then also the personal of, hopefully you'll get to sort of speak to people. Yeah, and then, rounding it out with, I suppose, some sort of quantitative health science work.
Yeah.
So it's this, yeah, that a lot of, I think sometimes students think that they are sort of going to be stuck with one kind of methodology or one way of looking at an issue. And when, you really look at the kind of work that the scholarship that's been awarded the scholarship does, that it can be this sort of different research, out of the box research.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was very quantitative based throughout my master's. And so coming into qualitative, it was very new for me, but I think I'm trying to marry the two of them and see how that works. And I don't think there's any right or wrong way of going about research. So that I found that really interesting, and hearing some of the other research that my peers are doing as well and the methods that they're using has really inspired me to think about some of my methods and seeing if I can incorporate any different methodologies as well.
Yeah, I think that another sort of under-discussed aspect of the PhD is the collaboration that you get from other scholars in the field, sort of outside of the university you're studying at, but also your peers. That I think that is really important. So I suppose that you've always been interested in health and health sort of scholarship. Was the maternal health subject matter something that you've always been interested in?
Yeah, it really was. We had a couple of kind of lectures during my undergrad, and it was really fascinating. I'm not sure whether it was the lecturer themselves that was really good, that's why the topic was really interesting, but the content and the way it was delivered really interested me. And yeah, it kind of stuck as well. And then during my master's, my research was on antenatal depression as well, and that kind of then led its way into my PhD. And just on more of a personal level as well, I've heard kind of stories from people that I know who have suffered from depression during pregnancy, but being in the community that we're in, like a South Asian community, we don't often talk about mental health as much. So that I think that really inspired me to kind of pursue this topic more.
Yeah, so then there's also the aspect of social stigma, I guess, can come into it also. So how did you learn about the scholarship itself?
Yeah, so we got an email initially from my department, and it was just an email about what the studentship was like, and an initial meeting to go and meet one of the professors who was in charge of our university. And I went to the meeting and we discussed what the studentship is like, what's involved, and then my supervisor then mentioned it herself as well, and from there I kind of pursued the application.
Yeah, and I suppose like the process of doing it involved you working with the supervisor to kind of construct a persuasive and like very tightly knit application. And in terms of what you would say to a potential, you know, undergraduate or master's student who's considering or, you know, has come across the podcast or the application, you know, just in terms of the benefits or, you know, why you would kind of encourage them to apply, and, you know, what it's allowed you to do.
Yeah, my advice would be is to definitely apply. I think especially this studentship, there's so many different like fields that it offers, that I feel like anyone can apply with whatever their interests are. We were a very like diverse group of people. I've got so many friends who are in the languages department, in the media department. So yeah, definitely apply. And I think what it's really allowed me to do is use my personal experiences and really bring that into research and what is important to me. And I think people of color need to be applying because they've got such unique experiences in life that I think really needs to be represented in the research that we're doing and in academia as a whole. So yeah, definitely apply.
Yeah, I think it is important in the fact of what the NINE DTP scheme is trying to do is to really open up to different kinds of methods and different kinds of research and knowledge production practices. And having, you know, the studentship is really helpful in knitting that community, but also in terms of giving you access to supports, and also the community of, you know, others that are doing this kind of research. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of maybe just a little bit more about the community, but also the resources or the things that it has allowed you to do, which you might not have been able to?
Yeah, of course. I think, yeah, the main thing is being able to just meet people from such different backgrounds, whether that's research backgrounds or whether that's just ethnicities or countries, just so many people from different backgrounds, from all walks of life, and just discussing each other's research and just seeing how we as individuals think is so interesting. And also in terms of like the activities that NINE DTP offers, we've got so many opportunities for workshops around different things, you know, workshops around theories or different methods, or so many different workshops, and then the conferences that are available as well. I think the last conference that we went to, the autumn one, when I just started the PhD, that one was amazing. I got to meet so many different people, and it's really given me like a place to kind of just go to and meet different people and discuss ideas and share ideas. So I definitely think this community is one, and we've got like different group chats as well that we talk, and we'll have like little Zoom catch-ups and stuff. So it's really nice to just be able to talk to people who are in a similar field, because I think sometimes a PhD can get very lonely, and especially now with COVID, it just makes it even lonelier. So having this community is great, and I think the NINE DTP community is really is quite tight knit. You know, everyone from all of the different pathways get involved, so it's really nice.
Yeah, that there's a kind of infrastructure in place for the conferences. I think, you know, I've heard from students who've gone that they've been really helpful, and they, you know, help them make connections and think about their research differently. And I think that is a really important part of the PhD that can go, you know, can be cast on the wayside a little bit, you know, in terms of, you know, if there isn't a community in place within the institution that you're at. So this is sort of like a secondary community that you can have outside. I think that is really, really helpful. Is there a bit of research that you're doing now, or like a finding or something really outside of the parameters of what usually counts as research that you could tell me about that might make a student who thinks that, you know, oh, what I'm interested in is not going to be something that they're going to fund, that they might find useful?
I can't think of anything that I'm doing myself. Mine, I think, is quite in the mainstream research, but I know a lot of people, and this is something that I only found out during my PhD and by talking to different people, is that a lot of people have started using social media in their research. And that's something that I'd never thought about as being a source of data, like people's tweets or people's Facebook statuses and like Instagram posts as actually being like viable data to include in research. So that was something that really interested me. And I mean, it makes sense because social media, especially now, is such a big platform that everybody kind of shares their views and ideas. So it is a really great place to learn about social interactions and how we communicate with each other. So that was a platform and the type of research that really interested me. And I know a lot of people, especially now with COVID, are starting to use more social media based research, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, I have a student who's looking at sort of representations of health amongst health influencers on Instagram. So looking at their profiles, the pictures they use, the kind of the way that they structure their you know, their pitches to the audience and the discourse, and really looking at them as a kind of like an important, you know, place for health information and health discussions and things like that. Is there, in terms of your own research with the interviews and sort of the more qualitative dimensions of it, are you going to be using sort of online means, like mediated interviews, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so in terms of interviews with healthcare providers, I will be using online methods. But with interviews with pregnant women, because I'm dealing with more rural areas in Bangladesh, that's where I'm finding it a bit difficult to see how I can access people in these more rural areas where, you know, connection and online platforms aren't really as developed. So that's one area that I'm still trying to think about. But I've got collaborators. So my PhD is a collaborative PhD. And I'm working with the charity who, they're based in the UK, but they do health camps in Bangladesh for pregnant women in rural areas. And they've got a really great team who work in Bangladesh as well. So I'm trying to figure out how I can use them as more of an intermediary way of collecting research.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, you know, just in terms of, you know, students who are listening or just anyone else, because I can kind of see a situation where if this situation persists and everyone starts doing their, you know, more like digital ethnographies and digital interviews, that there's going to be a community of people that are not going to be, that we're not going to be able to access, and their stories and experiences are not going to be communicated. And I think that can sort of leave a huge gap in knowledge production, but also in marginalized communities.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think NINE DTP, especially during the summer, they offered a couple of sessions, which was really interesting. One of the workshops that I attended was about how they use photography and videography in research. and it was the target population were women in rural areas, and it was really interesting to see how the researcher, how she kind of overcame the challenge of actually not being able to go to the country herself, but providing those women with kind of mobile phones to take their own pictures and videos, and then she could use that research. So that was really inspiring, and it made me think about how maybe I can introduce some of those methods into mine as well.
Yeah, and that kind of, those really flexible and experimental methods, you know, even for people who are unable to do on the ground journalism, you know, I've been using these kinds of methods as well. And yeah, you know, it's trying to find these ways to engage, even though we're not sort of been able to as well. So you moved from a more kind of, you know, a hard science background to the social sciences. And I'm wondering, you know, just in terms of that transition, what it was like first, and then also what you think social science can offer students of color in terms of where they can make a difference.
Yeah, so the transition from like my natural sciences into social sciences was interesting. It took me a while, particularly because I was doing the PG certificate for the first 6 months of my PhD, because I was in the 3.5 award. And one of the modules was about theories. And that took me a while to grasp, because as a natural scientist before, we never really discussed theories. It was very you know, objective research methods, like quantitative based research methods. So those theory sessions and just learning about how different people view the world, how different people view knowledge, took me a while to grasp. But it was really interesting, and it really made me think about my research and how I can use different theories. And now I think I've got a really nice grasp of what my theoretical framework looks like for my research, which I didn't have when I first put in the application. And it's really nice to have that framework in place, because I can then base all my methods and why I'm doing the research the way I'm doing it based on the way I view the world and how I see knowledge. So that was really interesting. And yeah, I think I'm definitely preferring social sciences to natural sciences. I think it just allows more flexibility. It allows us to kind of use more of our experiences that we've been through in life and how that's affecting the way we're doing our research. And the fact that social sciences, it spans so many different fields. You know, you've got economics, politics, geography, languages, and it's really nice to be able to have that multidisciplinary aspect, to not kind of confine your research into one field and just really use different ideas from different fields, which I found really, really useful and interesting as well. And yeah, for people of color, you know, we've got different experiences in life. We see the world differently. We've got so many different ideas that we can bring to the table. And for us to be involved in social sciences, it means that research can be more representable to the population. And we can really bring in our own experiences into academia and research.
Yeah, I think that actually resonates with my own experience as well, because I started out in biology. I did that for a year as my undergrad, and then I was in math for a couple of semesters as well. And then I just ended up taking a few courses outside of my discipline, and just fell in love with the ability to write, and I think it's interesting when you said, like, you know, that there's so many things, like it's a very kind of interdisciplinary field, because it seems like a lot of people who end up in social science are like the ones that can't choose one, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
It's that, you know, well, I love history, but then I also love, like, you know, the cultural studies, but I also love gender studies, and yeah, like, I don't want to kind of choose just one way of thinking about this project or this problem. And so then you can kind of jump around in different areas. Yeah. And I think that really, really aligns with the issue of, you know, like that people of color are bringing in a different standpoint. You know, they've got different experiences, and you want research to be representative. And you know, students who think that their experience or their research is going to be thought of as valid or as important, I think that, you know, saying like, no, that this is an important research. And I think that, you know, you sort of have identified a problem, like a gap in the research, that, you know, there are women whose experience of pregnancy, like, why don't we study this? You know, like, it's something that, you know, probably you observed, and then it sort of percolated in your mind for a while, and then you're like, no, there is no research. I should do this research.
Yeah, exactly. And then just thinking about it from different races and different ethnicities, you know, I have more experience with my ethnicity, so I can bring that to the table, whereas somebody from a white background won't necessarily maybe think about depression in South Asian communities, and then that kind of leaves that kind of group out, whereas people of color coming into research can really bring in these research gaps and start to fill in all these research gaps, which is really great.
And so do you do any kind of advocacy work around that as well? Just like, you know, outside of the university, or just in terms of engaging on different issues around maternal health?
So in terms of what on Instagram, I have a blog going. So the blog kind of deals with a lot of topics within the South Asian community that we often don't talk about. So mental health being one, sexual health, a lot of these topics that aren't really discussed within our community. So I try and start conversations about this on my social media platforms, and, you know, just provide my experiences and my views on these topics and see who else resonates with it, and just to see if, you know, we can learn from each other and bring these topics to the forefront so that people aren't feeling stigmatized about dealing with certain issues.
Yeah, and you know, I sort of you know, even in my own research, I don't necessarily do you know, the blogging, but I have started in the past year or so to do things like, you know, for every academic journal article I write, I'll do a public facing article. So something for like something that translate that research into something that can be like on Jacobin or on Dismantle, or some kind of public facing website that I think will make it accessible and engaging for just an average person who is interested, but is not, you know, won't be able to access a lot of the journal articles because they're behind firewalls, right? So, so there's that as well. And what do you think needs to? Well, I'll start with this. Why do you think students of color are not applying to this scheme?
I think maybe it's out of a lot of stereotypes that are out there that might make students feel like they don't belong within academia because they're not really represented in terms of if a student you know, goes into a department at university, they're probably more likely to not see a person of color. And that might then make them feel, oh, maybe then I shouldn't apply, I might not fit into this space. And a lot of the stereotypes that people have around people of color in academia, whether that's to do with, you know, just in terms of the way maybe a person of color might write might not be as seen as the proper way of writing, or you know, the languages that we use might not be what some people consider to be proper research language. So yeah, I think it's these stereotypes and just not seeing themselves represented enough to want to get involved.
Yeah, I really like that, that it's not only an issue of sort of not seeing yourself in the community that you're put in, and that can be really alienating, but also thinking that the kind of like linguistic and research competencies or interests that you have are just not going to fit in to that environment. And I think that institutions need to change in order to make it really clear. And that's what I was, trying to make more space for discussions to say things like, we need to open up the kinds of research that we do, the kinds of methods that we think of as the right methods. And the kind of research projects that we undertake should be ones that are not in the canon, that they have to be in the canon, representative of the canon, that we have to really break with that. And I think encouraging students to think about that is really important. Are there any other things you think that, any changes that you think need to occur for that to take place, either institutionally or structurally?
I think it's one of those things where the more people of color we get into academia, the more representative it becomes, and then that it's kind of like a knock-on effect. And then also just possibly having a platform where potential applicants or people who are interested in applying might be able to talk to some of the students that they relate with, because I know there's the whole list of all current students, and just having a platform or like a little buddy system almost, and just having that more one-on-one with students there, and seeing what our experiences are like, so they can kind of see that it is an inclusive space, and just reassuring them that what your research is, it's completely valid and you can apply.
Yeah, I really like your comment about the right language and the right sort of way to write, that institutions have to really open up so that different kinds of output is seen as like autoethnographic work, or looking at poetry within the structures, or spoken word, or all these other kinds of kinds of research. I recently listened to a sort of the first person to do their PhD dissertation as a podcast.
All right.
And yeah, so it's actually quite good. It's called My Gothic Dissertation. And the student is in English in the States, and she sort of, there's a written component that she had to do as well, but part of the dissertation was a series of podcasts looking at the Gothic novel and comparing it to the experience of being in academia.
Right.
And so she's like bringing out themes between the two, and so she sort of does it that way. And I think that that is something really innovative, and it should be something that that NINE would support, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of anything like that, but that's such a unique way of thinking.
Yeah, so I hope that students would really think that this is something that can be really flexible, and I hope that the NINE scheme sort of changes some of its all the advertising around it to really make it clear that they're open to this kind of research. So that's great. And are there any books or articles or pieces of art or media that have transformed your thinking in some way? That fits into your research, that sort of inspired you to to do the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, there has been a couple. One of which is more of a recent one was a book called Invisible Women. And that was such an interesting book. It was talking about how there's gender bias in the data that we collect, and how until we address the gap in the data that we collect, we won't be able to address the actual solutions that a lot of women around the world are facing, because we just don't have the data to support the problems that are out there. But the problems are very clear, but we don't have the data. It's because we're not even trying to include gender into the data that we collect. And that was really interesting. It really opened up my eyes to a lot of the gender inequalities that are present within all societies around the world. And it also made me think about how it's actually not even just gender. There's a lot of racial gaps as well, where we're just not doing enough research that includes race and different races. So that really inspired me to think about how I can really start addressing these gaps and make sure that I am the data that I'm collecting is inclusive of everything, of gender, of race, and different socioeconomic factors as well. So that was a book that really interested me. And there was this podcast actually called The Baggage Reclaim, which is run by a Black woman, and she talks about just general life things. It's very inspiring. Some of the episodes are about how we view ourselves, how we view ourselves as maybe an idealized version, instead of actually being a bit more easy on ourselves and seeing the right that we're doing. And yeah, so that podcast really inspires me. I listen to it kind of whenever I'm like on my commute or just on a walk or something, and it's really nice, some of the topics that we all know, but the way she kind of discusses it really kind of brings it onto a level, and we can really relate to it. And her being a woman of color as well, like we can really resonate with that as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that I wanted to sort of ask that question because you know, I find that often students who get into academia, there's always a couple of pieces of, you know, an article or like a TV show or a, you know, a film that they've come across that really pulls them in to look at a question more clearly or more specifically. And so, you know, I have sort of a similar experience with, you know, reading things around gender bias and, you know, the early kind of feminist work, and then looking at some of the recent research on race and also anti-racism as well. And I find that really interesting, especially, you know, around the issue of health, looking at in particular how racism like itself can be a sort of negative, have negative impacts on health status. So like the stress of racism as being something that has, you know, negative health impacts, and the stress that it can give, you know, the kind of like, you know, for like a Black man in a car who's pulled over, the heightened stress and the high blood pressure that comes from being scared of a, you know, cop coming up, and like that on a repeated level, that can have a kind of racial weathering effect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of the racial inequalities that we see in health really stems from racism. It's the unequal opportunities that people of color that we have, that's really where a lot of the inequalities in health stems from, in terms of just having the right access to healthcare, and then if we do access healthcare, what type of care do we receive? There's such inequalities between the type and the quality of care that people from different races are receiving. So it really does stem from racism, majority of the racial inequalities in health.
Yeah, and so
yeah,
go ahead.
and it's not mentioned in any of the literature. So you'll see a lot of stats, like from the recent COVID publication that came out. You'll see stats that, you know, so and so percentage of COVID is Bangladeshis that are getting affected, but then there's nothing to back it up with. Why is that the reason, and how we can then solve that issue? That it's just a lot of stats being thrown out there, but no actual reasons or solutions.
Yeah, and that's what social science can do, is it provides the context.
Exactly.
You know, to kind of say why this is the case and what we can do to change it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Is there anything else that you might want to say? Maybe just you know, in closing, what having, you know, just the basic support of the scheme has meant in terms of being able to kind of focus on the research.
Sorry, will you repeat that again?
Oh, you know, the having the actual, you know, the monetary and the structural support of the scheme, you know, what that has sort of meant in terms of your ability to focus on the research.
Yeah, no, definitely. The support that we get, and whether that's financial or just like the activities and conferences, it's made such a difference, you know, in terms of me going out for field work, and having that funded means that, you know, I can go out there and really collect the data that I need for this research. And yeah, definitely, it's opened up so many different opportunities that I can definitely use. So it's been great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Is there anything else that you wanted to share or say in closing?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit. It's been really interesting, and I think it's such an important topic to discuss.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.